Story 1. The night of the blood moon. It was the summer of '97, and I was a teenager in a small, sleepy town on the outskirts of Pennsylvania. Growing up in the '90s, I never thought much of the supernatural. Vampires were something from cheesy movies like Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Interview with a Vampire, but I was about to learn the horrifying truth in the worst possible way. The night began like any other. A group of us decided to hang out at the old graveyard on the outskirts of town, a popular, if morbid, spot for us to share ghost stories and sneak a few beers. The full moon was especially bright that night, almost as if it had been magnified by some unearthly force. But the moment I stepped into the graveyard, something felt wrong. The air was thick with tension, and a chill ran down my spine. We wandered through the cemetery, laughing, unaware of the terror closing in. And then we saw it, at first, just a shadow in the distance. But it wasn't any normal shadow. It moved unnaturally fast, almost like it was gliding. A figure emerged, tall and thin, with a pale face that looked as though it had never seen the sun. It came toward us, its eyes gleaming with an inhuman hunger. One of my friends screamed and tried to run, but it was too late. The figure was upon him in a second, pinning him to the ground with terrifying strength. I saw its fangs as it leaned down, and the sound of his blood being sucked from his neck made my stomach churn. The last thing I remember before I blacked out was hearing the creature's voice in a low whisper. "This is your warning." When I woke up, the graveyard was empty. My friends were gone, and the only evidence of what had happened was the bloodstains on the ground. To this day, I never go near that place, and I never speak of that night. Whatever that thing was, it was not a myth. It was a vampire, something older, darker, and more dangerous than any of us had imagined. Story 2. The Vampire in the Woods. Growing up in the '90s, I spent most of my summers in the woods behind our house. It was the perfect place for adventures until I stumbled upon something that no child should ever see. One evening in 1994, I decided to take a late-night walk through the woods with my dog Max. As a teenager, I thought I knew these woods like the back of my hand. But that night, something was different. The trees loomed tall and foreboding, casting strange shadows across the path. The night felt heavier, thicker, like it was pressing down on me. Max started barking wildly, pulling on the leash as though he sensed something I didn't. I tried to calm him, but he was insistent, pulling me deeper into the forest. We ventured farther than usual, and soon I lost track of time. That's when I saw it. At first, it looked like a man, a tall figure with long, flowing dark hair. But something was wrong. Its skin was unnaturally pale, almost gray, and its eyes glowed an eerie red. I froze, unable to look away. The creature smiled at me, and I saw its fangs long and sharp, glinting in the moonlight. Before I could react, it moved toward me, faster than anything I had ever seen. Max was barking furiously, but the creature ignored him, focusing entirely on me. Its cold, dead hands reached out, and I could feel the ice-cold chill of its touch as it grabbed my arm. In that moment, I knew I was face to face with something not of this world. It was a vampire. The air around me seemed to freeze, and I could hear my heartbeat in my ears. With all the strength I had left, I pulled away and ran as fast as I could. I never looked back. When I got home, Max was by my side, trembling with fear. I tried to tell my parents, but they didn't believe me. To this day, I still wonder if the vampire is out there, waiting for the next unsuspecting victim. Story 3. The Vampire's Lair. It was the summer of '96, and I was spending a few weeks at my cousin's house in rural Ohio. We were typical '90s kids, obsessed with horror movies, heavy metal music, and anything that would make our parents cringe. We spent most of our time sneaking into the woods near his house, daring each other to explore the old, decrepit mansion that had been abandoned for years. One hot afternoon, my cousin dared me to go inside the mansion alone. He claimed he'd seen something moving in the window earlier that morning, and his voice trembled when he told me. I laughed it off, thinking it was just a story, but something about his eyes made me hesitate. With a flashlight in hand, I entered the mansion. It was dark and musty, with rotting wood and broken windows. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was deafening. As I moved through the rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly, I heard a low, guttural growl. It came from upstairs. Against my better judgment, I climbed the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. At the top of the staircase, I saw a figure standing in the shadows. It was tall and thin, with pale skin and eyes that glowed a bright, terrifying red. Its long black hair framed a face that seemed almost dead. Before I could scream, it lunged at me, pinning me against the wall. Its cold hands gripped my throat, and I felt its fangs scrape against my skin. Panic flooded my mind, and I struggled to break free. Finally, I managed to kick it away, sending it stumbling back into the darkness. I ran out of the mansion, terrified, and never went back. To this day, I don't know if that thing was a vampire or something else, but I know one thing for sure: it wasn't human. Story 4. The Vampire's Whisper. I had a bizarre encounter that still haunts me to this day. I was hanging out with my friends at a local diner, just killing time before we went to a party. We were in the middle of a conversation when the door opened, and a man walked in. He was tall, with long dark hair that looked greasy and wild. His skin was almost translucent, and his eyes were the most unsettling part. They were blood red, almost glowing, and they fixed on me the moment I looked up. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the light. But as he walked past me, I felt a chill run through my body. I shuddered and turned to my friends, trying to brush off the unsettling feeling. But when I looked back, the man was staring at me from across the room. His lips curled into a sinister smile, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. My friends didn't seem to notice, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was horribly wrong. The man approached me, his footsteps silent on the diner floor. As he got closer, I heard a faint whisper in my ear, "You belong to me." I bolted out of my seat and ran out the door. I didn't stop running until I reached my car. When I looked back, the man was gone, and I never saw him again. But I know what I felt. That was no ordinary man. It was a vampire. Story 5. Vampires of the Old Town. In the spring of 1999, I moved to a small town in Maine for a fresh start. The town had a history, one of old buildings, dark alleys, and strange whispers from the locals. At first, I thought it was just the usual small-town superstition, but I would soon learn how wrong I was. Late one night, while walking home from work, I decided to take a shortcut through an old alley. As I passed a small, crumbling church, I noticed a figure standing in the doorway. It was a man, but something about him seemed off. His skin was unnaturally pale, and his eyes were like black pits, devoid of any human emotion. I tried to ignore him, but he stepped into my path, blocking my way. "You shouldn't be out here," he said in a low, gravelly voice. "Not after dark." I tried to brush past him, but he grabbed my arm with an iron grip, and in that moment, I knew this was no man. He was a vampire, and he was hungry. I broke free and ran, my heart pounding in my chest. As I looked back, I saw him standing in the shadows, his red eyes glowing in the dark. I never took that shortcut again, and I never walked alone at night. I still don't know how many others like him are out there, waiting for their next victim.